Right, we'll call today's Housing, Urban Development, and Zoning Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone.
Present.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Present.
Alderman Browning.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich.
Present.
Chair Clark Hubbard.
Here.
We have 6 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. With that, I'll accept the motion to approve the minutes from Tuesday, June 11th, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
It was moved by Alderman Cone and seconded by Alderman Aldridge. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone.
Aye.
Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
We have 6 aye votes.
All right, with that, we have approved the minutes from Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. We're going to move the agenda around and move ahead to item number 1 under discussions, the St. Louis Land Use Plan. While they move forward to the dais, Madam Clerk, can you read the summary?
Item number 1, St. Louis Land Use Plan. The planning divisions of PDA will present on the progress of work to update the city's Strategic Land Use Plan, SLUP. The City of St. Louis is in the process of updating its SLUMP created in 2005. The plan authorizes what kind of development can happen and where throughout the city, impacting decisions on zoning to strategies for creating a more walkable and affordable city. This presentation will discuss the work that has been undertaken to date and next steps the public may anticipate on the SLUP.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Ms. Kelly, you're recognized on item number 1, St. Louis Land Use Plan.
Thank you so much, and good morning. So it's been, I think, a few months now since we've been to this committee presenting on the Strategic Land Use Plan, and a lot has happened. So I think it's a really good moment in the project's progress to provide a comprehensive update for members of this committee. And so that's what we're here to do today. We're going to try to be as brief and concise as possible in our presentation.
I'm sorry, Ms. Miriam, could you just introduce yourself for the public?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
My name is Miriam Keller, City Planning Executive with the City of St. Louis Planning and Urban Design Agency. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, I'll jump right in, providing a sort of overview, especially for members of the public who might be watching and not familiar with the Strategic Land Use Plan. But then I'll also be inviting colleagues or members of the consulting team to provide a little bit more depth about the planning process and the emerging framework for the Strategic Land Plan. So with that, next couple of slides, please. So again, as sort of a level-setting overview about what even is the Strategic Land Use Plan, why does it matter, how do we use it? And is my audio working okay? Okay, I'm getting a little bit of an echo, but that's fine. So the Strategic Land Use Plan is a core element of the city's comprehensive plan. And what that is a policy guide for the city's evolution. And it's actually kind of a planning tool, a planning concept authorized under both state and local law. And next slide, please. A couple of other ways to think about it is sort of a basis for policies that shape a city's evolution, specifically evolution of the city's built environment. A long-term vision, so think 15, 20-year planning horizon here. And another way to think about it would be a grounded aspiration for the city's future and the city's kind of physical development. Next slide, please. This plan actually has legal authority. We use it all the time to shape and guide land use policy decisions that the city reviews all the time. So zoning changes and redevelopment plans are 2 examples of the types of land use policy decisions that we are obligated as a planning staff in partnership with the Planning Commission to use the strategic land use plan to guide the choices that the city makes. Next slide. I mentioned that the strategic land use plan is the land use element of this comprehensive plan. That broader plan can and will have more elements. So for example, the city is just embarking on an update to our sustainability plan. That update will be adopted as a component of the city's comprehensive plan. And also, the city is creating its first, depending on how you count, maybe first ever citywide plan for transportation and mobility. Portions of that will be adopted as part of the city comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. Whenever we present about the strategic land use plan or citywide planning in our city, we think it's important to kind of place it in historical context. There is, of course, a long history of planning in the city, some really positive ideas in our city's history, but also some really damaging, dark moments and decisions made in the history of planning in our city. And this is just very important for the public and for the planning team to keep in our heads as we are creating this new plan for the city's future, to try to correct and reverse some of those damaging parts of our history. What's highlighted here is 2005, which is the year that our current strategic land use plan was created and adopted. This was a really big step at the time, because after decades of kind of an absence of a formally adopted land use component of our comprehensive plan, the strategic land use plan was created and filled that void. And that is the plan that we use today. We amend it all the time, by the way, to kind of keep it current. That's still what we're using. But on the next slide, you'll see that here we are, 20 years later, updating in a complete way that 2005 plan to bring it closer into alignment with our community's values, current conditions, current needs, current opportunities, so that the plan we have is updated with that perspective. Next slide, please. And again, for members of this committee or members of the public who aren't familiar, this slide is our current strategic land use plan, just in a nutshell. There are 10 different land use designations that describe roughly the character of development in different parts of the city that we are aspiring toward. And then those designations are mapped onto the city at a high level. Think of kind of roughly a block by block level. And this is what we reference when somebody submits a rezoning application or when a redevelopment plan and the development is seeking to promote is reviewed against this strategic land use plan. Next slide, please. So this update is a big deal. We are 20 years after the creation of this 2005 plan, and a lot has changed. And on the next slide, too, you'll see some of the themes that are maybe implicit, but in some cases absent in our current plan. We are really trying to bake into this planning effort. So things like economic justice, walkability, transit-oriented development, climate resilience, all of these things we are trying to make core parts of this discussion. And with that, I will actually hand it over to Mr. Daniel Dioka to keep providing a little bit more of a context and this update.
Thank you, Miriam. So my name is Daniel Dioka, and I'm a principal and co-founder of Interboro, and we're the consultant team who is leading this SLOOP process. We're working with a lot of other folks. It's a massive project, but we're leading the project, and I'll be speaking about it with you today, along with Liz Kramer, who I'll introduce in a moment. Yeah, just like the slide says here, it's a really significant undertaking to do a land use plan. It's done not often, and it's not defense. It's really a way to affirmatively and proudly express a vision for the city's future. That's one of the things that's changed, I think, a lot in the last 20 years. And so that's one of the things we're working on for this loop. Next slide, please. So in terms of the ingredients, like a land use plan has a lot of elements. You just saw the existing sloop from 2005, and you saw the framework plan and some land use designations. But land use plans can also include design guidelines. It could also include implementation strategies, map overlays, long-term visions. The sloop that we're working on is going to include all of that, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. Next slide. So one of the things that we're going to recommend as a policy recommendation is an implementation and update to the zoning code. As it happens, the city has already allocated funding for an overhaul of the zoning code, as many of you know. This will happen following the formal adoption of the sloop, and it'll be a critical and long overdue project to bring the rules for land use and development into close alignment with the goals established by the plan. The land use plan is pretty high level. The zoning is really gets into the detail and starts to spell out the number of stories, the setbacks, the uses, all that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. So I mentioned we have a pretty big team. The consultant team is pretty big, but we're not by any means the only people developing this plan. So the planning team consists of us, PDA, obviously. We've been working closely with Miriam and Don and others at PDA. We also have a resident steering committee, and they have been really helping to guide the direction of the plan and also give us feedback on the process. So this is a group of 12 residents. We actually selected residents by a lottery system, although we wanted to ensure that the group was broadly representative of the city. And it's been a real pleasure to work with our resident steering committee. We also have technical working groups. They're focused around 3 goals that we have for the plan. So we have one focus on quality of life, one focus on resilience, and another focus on equity. And these are technical advisory groups, and we run by them things, and they actually feed us a lot of data and information to ensure that we're making a plan that reflects what people want to see. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of public outreach. You're going to learn about that in a minute. But finally, I just want to mention the Planning Commission. They will conduct the final formal public hearing. They have the power to adopt and amend this plan. And obviously, needless to say, they're a key part of this whole project. Okay, next slide. This slide gives you just a kind of big picture view of where we are. We're more than halfway through now. And where we are is we have a draft, we have visions and goals. We've got a draft of land use descriptions. We have a draft map. That's like a framework level map, and we're moving into turning that into a parcel by parcel map that has a designation, a new land use designation for every parcel in the city. We're also starting to work on implementation strategies and design guidelines and a whole bunch of other things. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz Kramer, who has been supporting the team on engagement. She's going to give an update on where we're at, what we've heard in recent months since we last spoke.
Thank you so much, Dan. Hello, members of the committee. I'm Liz Kramer with Public Design Bureau, resident of the 7th Ward. And I want to just give a quick overview about engagement. Next slide, please. So over the last 7 months, we've gone through a number of iterative rounds of engagement, and we've had really incredible participation from members of the community, including many of your constituents and you. Next slide, please. That's included over 1,300 people who've participated as of May. We have not updated in the most recent engagement. Mostly that's been city residents, but we've had someone from at least every residential zip code in the city, which is pretty exciting for us. We've had over 900 people who have shared their race and ethnicity, and 36% of those folks identify as something other than white. So we know that that's a little bit lower than we'd like to see. So we've been doing a lot of extra outreach in this last round, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And we've really heard from a wide age variety of folks across the city, which has been also really high priority, as this is the plan for the next 20 years. And we want to know what the people think across our age range. Next slide, please. We've done over 56 independent engagement activities that's been arranged: public workshops, pop-ups, specific focus groups with people, as well as a number of surveys and a huge number of presentations, particularly on thanks to Miriam's team. Next slide, please. We've also published 2 editions so far of our Sloop Scoop. We want to make sure you get the next edition, and there is another one coming. And that helps tell the public about what we've been learning. Next slide, please. And much of that information is also on our website. Next slide. And on our social media, which has an extensive following for a land use plan. Next slide. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of what we've been talking about with folks, from November to January, we did a round of engagement, really learning with people about what works well and what has potential to be better in St. Louis when we think about land use. Next slide, please. And folks created what those visions would be, and they told us what they wanted to see. And you'll see a lot of that reflected in what we'll talk about in a moment. Next slide. And in the Sloop Scoops, there's a summary of what we heard from folks about what they want to be seeing. Next slide. From January to March, we did a round where we were exploring a set of tensions that I know that all of you work with on a daily basis. And how do we really go back and forth between what it takes to redensify neighborhoods with high vacancy while recognizing that we can transform vacant land in different ways? Or how do we think about the fact that we want an urban city, but we're dependent on cars in this region? So that was very interesting. Next, thank you. We also did a vision survey, just wrapping up. I'll talk a bit more of that in a second. And next slide. And then in April, we did a very fun round where we took the very first draft of the land use plan out and asked people to react to it. And you can see that there was quite a bit of enthusiasm about this. Next slide. So we're currently kicking off this next round where we'll be getting feedback on the detailed map and the framework draft. Next slide. This is really an opportunity for us to get into the specifics of the designations, which Dan's going to talk about in a moment, and to have people really look at the specifics of their neighborhoods, the places where they go, and start to socialize the vision and goals of this plan and see how well that aligns for folks. Next slide. So this just kicked off last week. Thanks to Cecilia for hosting our first session with the City Youth Council. But we have a variety of sessions coming up over the next 2 months. Some are posted on the website now. Thank you to the Alderwoman from the first for registering for some already. You are welcome to join us for any of those public sessions. We'd love to see you at those and also have you share them with your constituents. Next slide. So I want to just give also a short overview about the vision and goals. Next slide. So why is a vision for land use important? As Dan said, it really helps us align around where we're going as a city for different partners, people in City Hall, people in departments, as well as outside organizations. It also provides that hopeful direction for the public to really believe in and buy into. Next slide. And I believe last time we came to spoke with you, we shared a little bit about some of the categories that we had drawn from the working groups and the steering committee. We took 7 categories about the vision out to the public and asked them to prioritize. Next slide, please. And we heard very strongly that it's really important for us to address thriving, equity, and growth in St. Louis. Next slide. And across all of our different demographic categories, we heard those 3 themes at the top, although they were presented in different orders depending on the identities of different groups. We spent a lot of time with the steering committee really digging into these results. Next slide. And that led to this vision. St. Louis will be a city that is equitable, thriving, and growing to the benefit of all current and future residents. Next slide. By moving towards this vision, St. Louis will affirm its role as the economic and cultural heart of the region for generations to come. Next slide. So this vision is something that we have to make very tangible in a land use format in this plan. So what we've been doing over the last bit of time is refining and honing a set of 9 goals that connect to those 3 interdependent and connected vision categories. This is the short summary of them. And what we're working on doing now, which Dan will talk a little bit about, is how do we get the proposals, when we think about the designations, the map, the implementation strategies, how do we make sure those are moving towards these goals to address more options for housing, to see vacancy as an asset, to foster more places for jobs? What are the tools that we have within land use to help move in that direction? I'm going to hand it back to Dan to talk a little bit more about where we are now.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. So that's exactly where we are, where we're taking those goals and we're thinking about how we can best achieve them. And you can go to the next slide. I know that no one can read it. This was not a table that was created for public consumption. Apologies that the text is so small, but I did want to share it because I think it outlines our process and thinking about how we're planning to achieve these goals. So in the left column are the goals. Liz just presented quickly shorter versions of these, but here they are in full. And then in column B there, you see ideas or proposals. So these could be policy proposals, process proposals, physical proposals that are meant to advance these 9 goals. This is not a complete list. Not all these ideas have been properly workshopped, but it is our working list, and it's what we're workshopping right now. So, and then in the subsequent columns, you can see where we are advancing these different ideas. So I mentioned earlier that there's a land use designation, there's a map, but also, if you go to the next slide, which you've already seen, but just as a reminder, policies and design guidelines and overlays and kind of long-term visions. That image on the right is a little bit of an Easter egg, but that's actually from the 1907 plan. We're not proposing any kind of new, Beaux-Arts monuments or anything like that. But that early plan and subsequent plans did include kind of big picture, long-term thinking, and we want to incorporate that as an aspect as well. So the land use plan, it's all of these things, and that table was just a first pass at us sort of saying where we think we're going to advance these goals and with what different ideas. So today, go to the next slide, we're going to update you on the land use plan and the designations, since that's what we've been really spending the most time on. But because we're focusing on this, there are a lot of other critical ideas in development that you might not have a chance to see today, because they're ideas that maybe are going to get articulated through a policy proposal or through design guidelines or through an overlay. So let's talk about these new designations. So here they are, and gone are the ROS PDA and the some of the other designations that you might be familiar with. This is just a slide that looks at why we decided to do new designations in the first place. It was always going to be an important task for us. I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but I do want to point out that we did do an analysis and a kind of diagnosis of the existing SLOOP and determined that there were a lot of problems with it that we wanted to solve with our new designations. For example, making it more aligned to zoning, making it more easy to use as a guide for zoning changes or redevelopment proposals, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we have first are proposed neighborhoods. So the new designations are not based on use, they're based on kind of structure. So what we have are neighborhoods, nodes, corridors, industrial areas, open spaces, campuses, and central areas. And I'll just say a couple words about each one. So first off, we've divided the city into neighborhoods. A better name for this might be primarily residential areas, because they do also include non-residential buildings. But these are the areas we think of as being primarily residential, might include other land uses like small parks, gardens, neighborhood shops, schools, churches, and other things. So we've divided it into 3 subcategories: lower intensity, medium intensity, and higher intensity. And we'll take you through each one very briefly. Next slide, please. So we're looking at high intensity neighborhoods. So you can see on the right on the map, the neighborhoods that we're proposing to designate high intensity neighborhoods. We're talking about buildings up to 5 stories high, very dense areas, limited parking, don't want to encourage any kind of cars in the front lot, want to encourage buildings to be urban, come up to the street line. You see in the center here a drawing. This is not anywhere in particular, this is prototypical. This is just a drawing to kind of say, generally, these are the characteristics from a kind of urban design perspective that we want to emphasize when we think about high intensity neighborhoods. So for example, parking in the back instead of the front, ground floor activation, all kinds of things like that. Next up would be the medium intensity neighborhoods. This is actually most of the primarily residential areas of the city get a medium intensity neighborhood designation. So now we're talking about buildings up to 3 stories high, no more than 8 units per lot. And here you see it's most of the historic fabric is St. Louis, not tall towers, 3-story buildings, a range of different building types, apartment buildings, accessory units, duplexes. So we want to celebrate the architectural diversity that St. Louis offers when it comes to housing design. Next is the low intensity neighborhood that's primarily in the kind of southwest of the city. You see some photographs there of what would count as low intensity neighborhoods. And again, you see a drawing there that just starts to spell out some of the more qualitative aspects of what we mean when we think of low intensity neighborhoods. Okay, next category is corridors. So corridors are areas along streets that would concentrate commercial uses and amenities as well as residential uses. This designation is primarily about the buildings and lots rather than the traffic or conditions on the street. So we've got another plan that is being done right now that's looking at the public right of way. We're looking at land use, right? So this is not about the street. This is about the land use on either side of the street. And so here you see our latest thinking about which corridors get which designation. A lower intensity corridor, a medium intensity corridor, or a higher intensity corridor. You see some pictures of each there. Next slide. So when we talk about high intensity corridors, we're primarily talking about corridors where there is existing or planned public transportation. So if you look at that map on the right, the streets that get this designation of high intensity, the Jefferson corridor. Why? Because we want to prepare for the Green Line, right? That's going to run up Jefferson. Good place for high intensity uses to support transit-oriented development. Same thing with Natural Bridge. Same thing with most of the corridors coming through the Central West End and the downtown. But here you get a sense in this drawing, again, of some of the qualitative things that we would like to do here. Again, kind of zero lot line buildings, parking in the back, a ground floor activation. So in terms of bulk regulation, maximum of 10 stories of height. Next slide. The medium intensity corridors are a lot of other corridors that have a lot of commercial activity or the potential for commercial activity, but that are not necessarily, the running through the Central West End or the downtown, or that don't have light rail stops on them. So here we're going down to five stories, but a lot of the same, qualitatively, a lot of the same things that we would want to see in the high intensity corridors here in the medium ones. And then you've got the low intensity corridors, which is basically the rest of the areas that have commercial activity, but a lower intensity. So 3 stories high in this case. What we're trying to show in the drawings in each of these cases is an environment that is better than what we might designate, what is an existing low intensity corridor today. So we're always trying to minimize auto-dependent uses. We're always trying to minimize curb cuts. and things like that, even in these lower intensity corridors. Okay. Next, we're going to move on to nodes. So nodes are strategic areas where housing, retail, offices, public spaces, or other things might be concentrated. Some nodes build off existing areas within St. Louis, while others would be new. And so you get a sense on the right of where we're proposing to distribute these, again, low, medium, and high intensity nodes. Very similar to the corridors. So we're higher intensity nodes are where there's going to be transit stops, and also in the central areas of the city. So this is the most intense designation in terms of development, 15 stories of height allowed. And you can see here primarily in the central corridor, but also at some key strategic points that represent the terminus of different transit lines. So for example, if you think about the green line along Jefferson, on the south is Chippewa, on the north is a Natural Bridge by Fairgrounds Park there. And that is a good candidate, we think, for a higher intensity node. Next, the medium intensity node is, well, you see a maximum of 5-story buildings, so no more 15-story buildings here. Although again, urbanistically, a lot of the same things that we would want to emphasize or encourage here. So medium intensity nodes are primarily intersections that have some kind of intensity of activity. These are not areas where there necessarily are transit stops. And then the proposed low intensity node, we're going down to three stories. And this includes most of the kind of major intersections towards the west of the city and then the more lower density areas. So that gets you to slide 58, which is a kind of summary of what we just presented. And so you can see in a kind of table form in the bottom left, those different intensities that I described for each of these different categories, nodes, corridors, neighborhood. Now, there are a couple of designations I'm not going to talk about today just because I don't have a lot of time, but we have been thinking also about industrial areas, which we split into heavier industrial uses and flex industrial. Green spaces are split between parks, basically, and green spaces that are meant to be accessed by the public, and then another green space category that will be for green infrastructure, solar fields, water detention, other areas that we might want to use for a flood buffer, for example. And then you've got campuses, but again, I'm not going to go into too much detail there. Next slide. I wanted to say quickly, and I know we're just about out of time here, that what you just saw was a framework plan. It's a high level view of how everything kind of hangs together. What we are working on now is taking that framework plan and translating it into what you see in the middle column, a parcel by parcel map where everything that gets a designation. Once that's done, once the rezoning effort happens, the parcel map will be taken and turned into zoning. So this is the big picture of how this is all getting implemented. And in the subsequent slides, I just want to show you how this actually plays out on the ground. So on slide 60, you see one of those nodes that we're looking at. So this happens to be Gravois and Jefferson. The next slide, if you were to take that framework plan, that kind of abstract thing, and overlay it here, well, it's going to look kind of funny, right? It's just like a circle and some thick lines. So again, what we're doing now is translating this into land use designation. Slide 62 is our first pass at that. Specifically, which parcels get the node, which ones get the corridor, which ones get the medium intensity residential. That's what we're seeing on this map, and that's what we've been up to lately, and what we're going to continue doing. And in fact, the next round of engagement is to do geographically specific engagement. So we can take maps like you're seeing here and say, did we get this right? Do you think that this parcel is good as a high intensity node? Do you think that these parcels are good as a medium intensity corridor? using all those drawings you just saw and all the precedent and images. So that just underlines the point that this is an open process. We're by no means done. We've done a lot of work, but we've got a lot to do. And we look forward to getting more public feedback and feedback from y'all. But thank you for this opportunity to update you today.
Any closing?
Well, I guess in closing, I know we just threw a ton at you. I believe all members of the committee have access to the slides, and like Dan described, we are not done yet. A lot more engagement, a lot more still to be done. But I think with that, we're interested in however you'd like to take it from here, Chairwoman.
Okay, I would like to make sure that we acknowledge all of your team that's here, especially Mr. Rowe and his blazer. I don't know if he wants to come up for the cameras. I don't know if he has any words, but before we open up for comments and questions, just wanted to offer an opportunity. Is that for introduction, if nothing else? Because I want people to see how your team shows up and has presented so amazingly today.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Dawn is always welcome to. So, Executive Director of the Planning and Urban Design Agency, Dawn Rowe, has been really making sure we ask the right questions at the right time in this process, bringing a lot of insight. I'm going to hand it over to him in a second, but also want to recognize James Pfister, a new member of the PDA team who's really been taking on a lot of responsibility in this process. And then not here physically today, but back at our offices are many, many other members of PDA, planners who have provided a lot of hard work and valuable insight into this process. And also, Dan mentioned them before, but the Planning Commission as just a real partner and sort of advisor in this process. I think the discussion we had when we shared a similar presentation with the commission was really valuable.
So I'll just say a few things, then turn it back to Miriam and have my attire on camera today, as unique as it may seem for me. One of the things about this is, boy, we've come a long way, because what we've had since 2005 is a vital legal document that prior to that, things were shaky.
I'm sorry, sir, I don't mean to interrupt, but could you introduce yourself for the public?
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
I'm Don Rowe, executive director of the Planning and Urban Agency. Thank you for that reminder. I've been here many times, as you know, over the years, and the importance of the gravitas of doing this to contemporary best practices, filling in more detail, is one of the things is that people from afar, whether they're across the river or across the county line, or in LA or New York or wherever, this will be something that they'll see on the web that inspires as to what we want and what we need in our city. So it's the land use plan, but it's important as we think about it that it's an element of the comprehensive plan, and all of those having the gravitas of being established can change over time and be amended. But this will be a very important event to get finalized. So I'll turn it back to Miriam.
All right, thank you so much. So as many times as I've seen this, I want to say I learn something new every time. It's really inspiring to me. So not just seeing it here, but seeing it online, because I do follow you all on Instagram and on social media, and then seeing you all in the community, right? Mission St. Louis and the places you showed up in the 10th Ward, and hear my role in the Planning Commission, seeing it there. Of course, the Sloop Scoop, opening it up and being able to learn something. So I really appreciate the engagement, the intentional engagement that you all have been doing, because I know from my community, it allows them a voice that they don't feel like they've had in prior planning processes. And it's the difference between us feeling like something's happening to us versus with us, and I've said that before. And so, again, I thank you all for always saying yes. Also, in those spaces, being patient and taking time and explaining when people don't really, understand, and they might not even be hearing. I've seen and witnessed you all turn conversations around that sometimes, quite frankly, started off maybe a little confrontational, but then in the end, they learn and are educated and know, and they feel good about being a part of the process. So I want to thank you all for that, because that's a skill set that some people just don't have. And it'll turn a situation, a process, like Dan said, this open process, it'll turn it in a totally different direction if you all didn't take the time that you all are taking. So I want to thank you all for that. Personally, thank you all for that from my vision of it, and then open it up to my colleagues. Let's see, we'll start with Alderman Cone. Did you have any questions? Alderman Cone, you have any questions? Okay. Alderwoman Slicer.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, and thank you for being here and for all the engagement that you've done and for coming to the town halls that you've come to, and I appreciate it. So looking at slide 62, and slide 62 is really helpful to understand how all of these different categories lay over each other or could lay over each other. And I know you mentioned upcoming engagement around specific zones. So are you imagining at these upcoming engagement sessions that there would be kind of zoomed in, if you will, in those specific areas, and people being able to see something this detailed and give comments on this? And can you talk about those meetings? If so, you're nodding. The style of that meeting, whether it's like an open house or a sit down or a presentation, and just what people would expect to kind of see.
Absolutely. To your first question, that's exactly right, is sharing this detailed version of the plan in the context of the framework, and then also kind of clearly explaining the designations and what it means for a property or block to be designated one way or another. So yes, absolutely, because this is kind of part of where the rubbers meet in the road,
Right.
and it's really critical to get the community's input, but also like intelligence, right? They know a lot about how different parts of the city work, and not to seek their kind of consultation and reaction would be a mistake. As to the style of those meetings, I'm going to hand it back over to Liz to describe the facilitation approach.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam. So in these upcoming sessions, we will have a kind of mix depending on what the context is, but most of those sessions will be a sort of guided format, which I believe you've participated in a few of those in earlier rounds. So people will be walked through, and to Alderwoman Clark Hubbard's point, a lot of these materials are very dense, and while we're trying to make them incredibly accessible, we want to be sure that people have comfort and familiarity with what are they looking at. So as we go through those, we have in each of those geographies a number of specific points where there's something that's a little tricky or hard. And I think this version up on the screen is a good example of that, where I feel like I know a lot about St. Louis, but I don't live at this corner, and so I don't know where those specific parcels should change or end. So we've highlighted a few of those for people to really talk through in depth with their neighbors and with the other folks who attend those sessions, giving them some exposure to what's happening. There are a handful of sessions that will be a little bit more open house style. I believe, just to highlight one, there's one on June 27th that is about the industrial areas through South City, and that will be a little bit more open house style because there's so many different sites, so we'll let people gravitate to the place that they're most familiar with. But for the most part, we'll be taking a look at those specific areas, and then we have a bunch of questions. Like we really need people's help and their input and their experience with these areas to really understand how should we think about this. And I think one final thing I'll say is that as we've done workshops throughout this process, the residents of St. Louis have been so incredibly generous in thinking about their neighbors, not just the place where they are, but how does that impact other parts of the city. So we're hoping that we're going to learn a lot that can inform many, many parts of the city through this part of the process.
Thank you. And the question I have, I represent far south East St. Louis City, and there is one node, a low intensity node in a portion of my ward around where the Loughborough Common Shopping Center is. But there's no nodes along South Broadway or Ivory Triangle area or Bevo, Gravois areas where there is a lot of intentional, transit-oriented development happening, as well as, business sectors of the ward. And some of those areas are on sort of the lower intensity corridors. So I guess I'm interested in how the corridors and the nodes interact, if you see more of those being like intersections or the centers of neighborhoods, and why one area might be a corridor and not a node, or if that's just related to like building height.
Yeah, so in a minute, ask Danza to explain kind of the differences between those types of designations. But first, I just wanted to mention that question about where nodes kind of belong in that part of the city and the nature of the corridors in that part of the city is a very perfect example of one of the tricky questions that we want to bring to the community.
Right.
Because looking at that part of the map, it's like there are lots of places where we could think about things a little bit differently or kind of illustrate them in different ways. But a lot of that should be informed by the specific kind of experience and aspiration of kind of people living in that part of the city.
Right.
Thanks, Liz. That workshop is Sunday, June 3rd.
The Carondelet one, yeah, that's one
Right.
I will be there. It's just a really, and I'm glad that those conversations are still happening. Obviously, this is a draft, but that is such an interesting part of my ward, because on one side you have industrial, on one side you have, community businesses, bars, shops, restaurants kind of thing, and how that works. I guess the final question I have, and then I know there's lots of colleagues who have questions, but is around some of these designations are both the reality of what exists in a neighborhood and then what gets at like the aspirations of what the neighborhood would move towards. And now we have in some districts like things like special use districts, like in the Bevo section of my ward, there are car dealerships and repair shops, but in our special use district it says no more of those. Do those things act as overlay? How do you imagine some of those things either being built out into the node and corridor or whatever designations, or is that the next step in the zoning process?
Yeah, that's such a good question, kind of a technical one to start to explain. But I think that kind of, for example, the Bevo SUD was one of the things that was reviewed by this team as something to inform the framework plan, so that in its implementation with whatever updates we're going to make to zoning, it is further reinforced, or at least that there's no kind of diversion from the policy guidance put in place by that SUD, which was, I understand, very informed by community input and a planning process. And so this plan is not necessarily seeking to challenge or change those types of things where there's been another way to answer would be one of the very first things that the planning team did was review all of the existing plans throughout the city so that those could be kind of reinforced in the citywide planning document and maybe built upon and connected to how all of this fits together in different parts of the city. So I guess that's how I would start to answer, but I want to open it up in case Dan wants to expand on that.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam. Thanks for your questions. Well, first off, definitely hit that Carondelet workshop. And just to your earlier question, I think the difference between like a node and a corridor in a residential area is basically when something different happens. So there are a lot of corridors that might have a corner store or a business here and there, but that for the most part, it has the characteristics of the adjacent neighborhood. Those didn't get the designation for corridors because it doesn't really need to, because the residential designation is going to include you'd be able to still operate those businesses. Same thing with a node. There are intersections of most of the nodes are intersections of corridors, but there are intersections of corridors where nothing substantially different happens. It just looks like a continuation of the corridor. And so for the most part, that was our criteria. When something different happens, when suddenly at an intersection, you've got buildings that are, 10 stories instead of your typical 3 stories, which you find on the corridors, well, then we made that a node. It was a lot informed by the existing zoning. We had a kind of algorithm that we used to help translate zoning into these new designations we made. But I hope that gives a little context into what the difference is between corridors and when something gets the node designation versus doesn't. That said, again, that's why we're having these geographically specific workshops, because if somebody does want to change the character of a corridor to make it more intense, we want to know about that. We want to support that. Just to the question about like the overlays, yeah, I mean, as Miriam said, the first thing we did was we read every overlay and SUD and historic overlay and neighborhood plan that existed. And so what we found actually is that there's quite a lot of, we haven't seen too much that contradicts anything that we would want to do. There's so much momentum and consensus towards trying to make neighborhoods more walkable, more transit friendly, trying to encourage mixed development where it's appropriate, that we haven't really had to push back on anything that we've found in any special use district or neighborhood plan or overlay. So far so good, but we are not doing this in a vacuum. We're obviously very cognizant of all the great planning that's done before.
Yeah, and thank you for that. The two of the main areas that I would have concern about in my ward and what's proposed have upcoming community engagement sessions, Bebo and then Crondelet and Patch. So I look forward to attending those and hearing more as it develops. Thanks for taking all this time to answer my questions.
I thought about something when we spoke about the style of the meetings that might be different, because I know you all have intentionally come out in the communities, in the neighborhoods, specifically broke down different areas that you can meet people there. But I know it's kind of tricky how we're saying what's considered a neighborhood and a neighborhood organization, but it might be beneficial to organize an intentional meeting of neighborhood organization leadership down there at 1520, and then have the different, that's a way that you can have then the information disseminated out within the neighborhood organizations, either have their leadership or a representative. That might be something different to think about. Alderman Browning.
Thank you, and thank you to our planning team. It's been really, really neat to watch this process play out, and I have to echo my colleagues' comments about the engagement so far. It's been wonderful to see. I've made it to a couple events and to always have engaged people, which is hard to do. Anyone who runs community engagement knows how hard it is to get people to come out and share their thoughts. So I think you all have made a very nice environment for that. I have a couple questions about similar to the idea about nodes versus corridors and what overrides the others. So it seems like a node would be the highest use there versus a corridor, which is the general stretch of land. But say you have a node, I'm noticing that, like, for instance, a corridor will allow up to 10 stories. A high intensity corridor will allow 10 stories, but then a high intensity node would allow up to 15 stories. So which would override there if it would weigh in the outline of the node?
Yeah, maybe if we would switch back to I forget what slide, maybe 61, something like that. Or 62, please. Yeah, thank you. So in the framework plan, there is this element of kind of different designations overlaying with one another. But as that is sort of detailed out in this more detailed, like block and parcel based version, any given block or parcel will be kind of one or the other. So it would be clear whether, you know, you would be guided by the corridor designation and kind of accompanying design guidelines or the node.
Okay, so this will go all the way down to the parcel, and that makes sense. The limits on stories, and I'm just getting real aspirational here because obviously St. Louis is not a hugely high demand market at the current moment, although we hope to have that be different in the future. But if there were, say, a proposal for a 16-story tower in a node area that only goes up to 15 stories, that's still possible, or would that just be seen as kind of an exception to the strategic land use plan?
The way I see that it would play out would be that these designations would then be implemented in more specific kind of zoning districts and zoning regulations. And so, you know, I can imagine some future zoning district would have a maximum of whatever number of stories, and the appeal process would still be available to anybody. And I think another point is that the zoning districts and designations, there might be one, two, or more that are developed to really detail out each specific designation. So, you know, say we have like high intensity node in different parts of the city or even within a given node, that might look like slightly different things based on how the zoning districts are reworked and how they're remapped in the zoning code update.
Gotcha, because I think like the last thing we want to do is make it more difficult to get some of these things. Like the new 100 above the park tower is 36 stories tall. The new hospital tower that's nearing completion is 16 stories tall. While those both would probably fall in like high intensity nodes, I want to make sure that we're allowing for additional things to reach those heights, and if there's the demand for it, and if we can get that kind of building.
A couple of the designations that weren't presented but are detailed a little bit in that framework map on slide 58 that also has the table. We have a couple of, I think we're calling them central area designations, including downtown and some parts of the city where the character is already including a lot of density. That's where a lot of our existing transit stations are focused. The height permissions there, or height guidance, are actually quite a bit more, I'll say, kind of ambitious or kind of urban in character than even the corridor or some of the node or neighborhood designations that we shared earlier.
Okay, thank you. I saw a couple different, switching gears here a little bit, I saw a couple different mentions in some of these nodes and some of these corridors and in some of these neighborhoods of defining where parking can be, and also defining in some of the examples given, like what we call bulb outs or bump outs for the intersections to create additional pedestrian, you know, walkability and access. I'm assuming that there's some interaction with streets involved here, but is this strategic land use plan, does that also kind of guide our streets department and what we're aiming to see? And so, like, I'll use an example, Gravois. Gravois is an awful road. I'm just going to call it out. It's an awful road for pedestrians. It's an awful road for, I'm surprised when I see someone bicycling on it. It's just a terrible designed road right now. As we think of the uses of the land along there, you know, I think it's important to also think of the use of the street and what that looks like to encourage the kind of activity we see. You could have a great public park, but if you can't cross the road to get to it, then it's not really very useful to the people around it. So how much interaction with our, say, the upcoming transportation mobility plan or anything else streets related is there with the sloop?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the kind of treatment of the public right-of-way may not be the sloop's formal jurisdiction, the transportation and mobility plan will be more of the formal document guiding those things. We're very fortunate that these processes like overlap in a pretty timely way. So what we have done so far, but I think this is still going to be a conversation with that planning team, is kind of illustrated some of the things both that we've heard from the public in terms of what a more walkable, pedestrian supportive public realm would look like, and also just best practices, right? Like if we're trying to make places, this is what we would do. So we have illustrated those in those like drawings that Dan shared. And we're going to be, because that is all part of the same conversation. But in the transportation and mobility plan process, one of the pieces of what that plan will include are street design typologies that would create some pretty specific and well-illustrated standards for when we are rebuilding or improving a street. Here's where the conversation starts in terms of design. And what those typologies look like, where they hit the map, and how they interact with the land use plan all is really important. And so we've had at least one conversation so far with that planning team. I think we have another scheduled like Friday to make sure that these plans are just very clearly mutually reinforcing.
That's great to hear. I think it really affects how we use our city, both places and placemaking, and then how you get between those places. And I'm assuming that the zoning update that will follow this will address the more specific uses. So if we don't want to see, for instance, a gas station in a certain area, that contributes negatively to walkability and the environment, that would be kind of boiled down more into the zoning to address those specific uses.
Strong yes. And I think as these designations are further refined and developed, they're going to start to speak a little bit more toward use because, of course, the idea is that this plan is the foundational document that guides the zoning code update. So yes, and I would say.
Okay, well, I really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to the additional engagement and seeing the additional detail. And I just, again, want to emphasize that I think for a city our size and our location, we're lucky to have the planning. We punch far above our weight, and that's thanks to the people in your department. So thank you.
Absolutely. Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and thank you to the zoning department. When I say like this slideshow is like one of the best slideshows I've seen, I am here for like pictures, like the graphs and everything. I know our chairwoman loves maps. I also love like the maps to really see like where we're talking about with some of these things. So just a comment and then not too much of a question. I'll just echo also what the alderman from the 9th said as we're moving forward with the sloop, making sure that that is connected to the infrastructure kind of plan of things because, we can design out, how we want neighborhoods to look and, what is important for certain areas, what may work for Central West End, what may work for South St. Louis and North St. Louis. But like the alderman said, if we don't really connect outside of designing the traffic that goes along with it, it's a huge opportunity along with like the brick line and making some of these streets that once upon a time, it made sense to have large streets, down Grand or down maybe like Natural Bridge or they kind of tight Natural Bridge of the previous Alder people, but we still have these very large streets and don't have like the population for it. And to bring these designs that I think, not just designs, like a comprehensive plan of what neighborhoods should look like, and also working with the neighborhoods because I know that's important with the community engagement. I know a lot of neighborhoods already have plans that they wanted to see in their community. How do they ensure that the history of St. Louis Place or the history of College Hill is continued to be intact while we look at ways to, redesign it in a comprehensive way citywide? Would just echo that we make sure that that traffic plan and the SLOOP plan all comes together to not just make sure we have safer neighborhoods, but safer streets because they go hand in hand. Not many questions. I wasn't on the committee last year when you guys presented the first plan. Just really diving into this kind of updated one and know how to reach Don and others if I have any questions. But this is just a lot of great information to digest, and thank you for all the hard work you guys put into it, and especially the community engagement, because I think that's always critical. We always may have great ideas, but without engaging the community, sometimes that can end up being a bad ingredients if they are not part of how to make that cake. So if there is more opportunity for community engagement, we'll love to ensure that I'm part of that to connect with different neighborhood associations so that they can also have input in the process as it moves forward. But thank you to the zoning department on this.
I appreciate the comment, and something that your remarks just now reminded me I should have shared a little bit more about is we're trying to take great care to make sure that the citywide plan is kind of connected to and supportive of also neighborhood planning. So in addition to this kind of citywide, big picture, how does everything fit together, PDA is also going to be leading neighborhood planning in 3 clusters of neighborhoods starting very soon, actually this year, all of those on the north side, and that is in addition to the neighborhood planning underway around the NGA that SLDC is overseeing. And so when I say kind of great care, one of the ways we're trying to be careful is not kind of showing up, asking the same questions through different processes, right? We want to kind of thoughtfully engage community to make sure that what we hear at one time is reflected kind of both the neighborhood level plan and the citywide plan. So some of the neighborhood kind of place-specific meetings that we're still working to schedule are in areas that overlap with those neighborhood planning geographies, just to make sure we sync up those processes.
Like I say, as those conversations and engagement over the where the NGA is, and I know for years we've been having a lot of meetings like with Project Connect with SLDC. So as those conversations come together, where it's like the neighborhood plan and the city planning, again, just let me know I could be a help because I think residents have started those conversations of especially like how do they preserve the history of those areas, and like you say, don't want to be like, okay, guys, let's do it all over again. So just as those processes move forward, definitely willing to be a help in that community aspect to connect them both from city to neighborhood plan altogether.
All right, thank you.
Vice Chair Sanya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Miriam, Ms. Keller, whichever one. Nice to see you. Nice to see you too, Ms. Kramer. I feel like you guys just would echo the sentiments, have done like a really intentional in community engagement, which I think is really important. I've had constituents go and come back asking me all sorts of zoning questions that then have prompted me to email you all and ask further questions. They've really loved the interactive portions of meetings where they could go and play around with things. I think that zoning can be such a nuanced topic for a lot of folks, and I think the ways that you guys have went about doing zoning has really allowed it to be, you know, not just community engagement for the sake of doing it, or community engagement where you would have to be in the field to understand, you know, or be an urban planner, but I think, you know, you could be working a completely different industry and be just, you know, a resident of a neighborhood without much knowledge and still go to the meetings and understand that. So first, I just really want to commend you all for your intentional and well accessible community engagement. I'm glad that you're still planning to go more. I probably will be tapping you all to come to town hall, so I'll just throw that flag out there here. And then, yeah, I think the community engagement. And this past week, I went to the Strategic Code Enforcement Management Academy with some folks from the Building Division and Problem Properties Office, and there were people from other cities. And I was talking to them a lot about different zoning codes, building codes, and they kind of came, a lot of it boiled down to, it's like, until there's like our codes are so outdated and antiquated that until there is kind of a comprehensive overall U-Haul of this, it will be very difficult to then do, I know Alderwoman Clark Hubbard has an ADU bill. I know many of us are having conversations about things to move through kind of planning. And I just kind of learned from that conference that many of our work will be so much more easier to do and will play out so much more better when we do have this overhaul. So I'm very glad that you all are taking a look and taking a peek into it. I don't have many questions. I don't know if these are questions or things that I'm just flagging for us to kind of be aware of. But when I was at the conference, I was asking other cities, when you all overall your zoning codes, what type of sensitivities did you give to low-income communities in protecting existing residents? Because I do think there are a lot of folks in communities, change is hard. And I think it's almost sometimes human nature to be a little resistant to it. And some of the things, one of the things that I found out is that it's very different, but in Charlottesville, Virginia, they did something with their zoning where they basically, in their up to 3 units of housing and lots previously zoned for single-family units, except in historically low-income communities. So basically, like, they really have toyed around with how to connect your zoning to housing. And how do you make sure that you're, attracting things and looking at density, especially for those lower income communities that oftentimes once you overhaul zoning may get more interest, and like, how do you do that in a way that grows with them and not for them? And I know the sponsor of that ordinance, I got to meet them. So if there's ever any interest to like have those questions, happy to do that, but just to focus on denser housing in historically low income communities as a combating to sometimes the unintended consequences of what we're doing. And then I guess my question for us is like, do you have anything specifically in mind of, you mentioned like the history of our city, and I think we are kind of doing the opposite of what zoning has been used to do. I think zoning sometimes historically has been used to zone people out, and I think this round we're trying to figure out how do we zone people in. Are there any specific approaches or things that we should be aware of that you all are being mindful of as you do this overhaul, or that you think you might maybe want to see more conversation about or more thoughts or feedback into?
I think there will be many. And I think, Dan, to the degree that there are kind of specific policy ideas that have come up that you would want to speak to, feel free to. But a couple of things that come to mind for me are, how can we use this plan as a way to reinforce kind of communicating areas that need kind of specific types of careful reinvestment and revitalization. We want this plan to help reinforce kind of the economic justice opportunities for our city, and we're still working through how to do that. Diversity of housing and affordable housing, like in every community engagement, that comes up. I know that's not going to be surprising for anybody in this room, but that is kind of clearly top of the list. And I think, to your point, like, urban form and the uses and types of buildings that we allow are part of the equation, but not the complete answer to how we approach that kind of holistically and carefully. So in addition to the zoning policy recommendations that come out of this plan is also an opportunity and kind of set up to flag kind of complementary policy recommendations or things that other cities have tried to do to more holistically tackle those issues. And then, of course, PDA is not the only city department charged with thinking about kind of housing and our city's future. So a lot of our work, too, is about coordination with CDA, SLDC, the building division, and many others, so that we can have a holistic approach, and then so that this plan can set us up to do that. Dan, anything else specifically that comes to mind for you?
No, I think you put it really well. I would just add that I completely agree with what was said, and yeah, I think you're exactly right. Zoning has been a tool that has been weaponized and has been used to divide, but it doesn't have to be that way. So we have two goals that we established right away to ensure that any proposal we made supported people being able to benefit from whatever changes this plan brings in. So one of them, for example, is to expand opportunities for more people of St. Louis to build their wealth and stake in the city by understanding and being a part of development change. So that one is leading to all kinds of proposals that we're looking into about reducing barriers to development, to helping people understand the tools that are available for development, to understand. So that's one thing. But another goal that we have is really critical is to offer housing options that meet the diverse needs of the community and support residents staying in their neighborhoods through change and growth. And so for that, yeah, I think a lot of what Miriam said, I think a lot of what the land use can do is ensure that we are facilitating the construction of a diversity of housing options so that people have the kind of people find housing options that are right for them. That could include something like ADUs, which is one of our policy ideas. Increasing repair funds, I mean, I think also just ensuring that we incentivize building in places where there's access to transit is another thing. So I totally agree with the concern, and it's something that we've really tried to foreground again by incorporating it as a goal, or in this case, two goals, and thinking about different policies that would support that goal, in addition to some of the things we're doing just to expand housing options and affordable housing options.
Thank you. Again, I don't know if this is a question or a flag, but I know that you all are hyper aware of how almost everything has to go before the Board of Adjustment because of our outdated zoning. So something that I learned, I asked a lot of the other cities there and saw some of them did have very different processes outside of conditional use, so whatever the case may be. But kind of in our working group, we talked about what it might look like to have kind of the conditions preset. So like if you were a barber shop, or if you were a liquor shop, or a liquor store, or whatever, who was going through where those conditions, rather than being kind of negotiated and discussed at every single instance and having to be individually considered, if there were ones, based off of your community feedback and engagement with alders and other, elected officials and communities, where I would just like to see that process be more efficient. I think there's so much that has to go before the Board of Adjustment, and it's just kind of a sign to me of an inefficient system. I would love to see a system where we were just clearer on our standards and expectations as a city based off of how you plan to use this space or operate in this space, what those conditions were. So I don't know if that's, maybe the question is, are you guys talking about that or considering that or thinking about that?
Well, 100%. I think what we don't want as a city is for every development, and maybe especially development things that are in keeping with the community has said we want, right? We don't want that to be a negotiation every time. Like, we want to make it easy and clear and predictable for people to do the development that we've all agreed on, we would like to see, and kind of communicate all the, just as you said, communicate the conditions and expectations up front, so it can be a shorter, clearer process where everybody understands how it's going to work and when to provide input and what the process is. I think the zoning code overhaul, maybe not far from the only measure of success, but one for us to keep in mind is how we can reduce the number of items that do end up on a Board of Adjustment agenda, because the code, once we have a new code, should account for the, all of the tensions and considerations and community points of view, like, built into the policy itself, rather than having it be sort of a discretionary, tricky choice every time.
Excellent. I'm glad you guys are already going to have a transit focus. I won't ask. It sounds like that's been flagged and echoed enough by colleagues. I don't know if this is something that's a part of zoning, but I also learned at the conference that there's a lot of places within our city where there's still restrictive covenants in place. So maybe that's just something to flag for you all to take a look as you look at the zoning, because a lot of those were racially segregated and account for investment and disinvestment in certain places in our city.
Yes, it's shocking that those things are kind of still around, even if they're unenforceable, right? Like, it's shocking nonetheless.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Did you have anything that you wanted to close us up or next steps? Okay.
One is, as we talked about, the magic word is not updating, but you just use overhaul. And that's really important.
I'm sorry, is your mic on? The light should be green.
Colorblind, so, okay, now it's green, yeah. Just three quick things. You know that my brevity is not often exposed, but I'll do it now. One, overhaul of the zoning code is really the operative thing. We're not tweaking, we're overhauling it and getting it to be to best practices and remove some poor practices. So that's cool. Second is in our talk about how other things work together, is coordination of all this is important. So one of the things we put in the slide is the strategic land use plan in conjunction with the mobility plan, the sustainability plan as part of the comprehensive plan that things should be reviewed against. We got to get moving with that. And another thing is we have a great team. And I appreciate everybody's respect and support of that great team because it's very deep, but not very broad. We don't have that many folks. And we network and do things nationally quite well. I'm smiling because a month and a half ago, I had dinner with the communications guy for the mayor of Charlotte. We were both at a planning conference. So that networking and learning from other places is important, and bringing people back to St. Louis like Miriam has exposure and talents from abroad. From broad levels of talent, and in our team, I'm very proud of it. So, thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Keller. All right, we'll move back to under board bills for review, item number 1. Alderman Narayan, you're recognized on Board Bill 41.
Good afternoon, members of the committee, Madam Chair. In the drive, there is a committee substitute to Board Bill 41 that I think it would be prudent to put in front of us before there's a committee substitute and then an amendment to that committee substitute that I'd like to just get done from the nuts and bolts before we jump into the conversation, so that we are talking about the end work product that I'd like to discuss here today. So if someone would like to put the committee substitute in front of the committee, I would appreciate it.
I move to place, to adopt committee substitute 40, for Board Bill number 41.
It was moved by Alderwoman Schweitzer and seconded by Alderman Aldridge. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone.
Aye.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanier.
Aye.
Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge.
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
We have 6 aye votes.
Okay, great. So now we have Board Bill number 41 committee substitute in front of us. May proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. And there's also an amendment in your drive. The amendment is quite simple. On page 2, line 9, we strike out the words both owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied and insert in lieu thereof the words non-owner-occupied. This just takes the owner-occupied short-term rentals out of this ballot language for reasons that have been discussed here previously, and I'll get into further as well if the committee would see fit to put the amendment in front of us as well.
I would move that we adopt amendment number 1 to board bill number 41 committee substitute.
Second.
Discussion, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I know there's been discussions about the license fee, who's paying for, who has to get a license, when they have to get a license, and what triggers having this fee implemented. What this amendment would do is change the committee substitute from where it says owner and non-owner occupied and strike out the owner occupied so that they're not paying for any fee in the language. Is that correct?
Yes, so going back to, if you remember the discussions, Board Bill 33 and 34, the idea was that we did not want to put any overly burdensome regulation on people who are renting out like a room in their home, you know, if they actually reside in the short-term rental. And so we split into two categories, the owner-occupied, non-owner-occupied. The owner-occupied category, the regulations are different, and I would say notably more lax than the non-owner-occupied regulations under 33 and 34. In that same spirit, to not put a burden where people are, you know, paying taxes on rooms inside their own homes, that we sought to remove them from the ballot language here.
Are they not paying the hotel? Will they not, and the implementation of 33 and 34 be paying the hotel tax for the sales?
So the people who, well, so I feel like now we're getting far afield of what's in front of us right now, which is this board bill. I think we're going back to a previous session, but in board bill 33, 34, the licensing requirement was different for people in owner-occupied as opposed to non-owner-occupied.
And because this is tied, and when we set laws, we try to enforce them. So when we're
Exactly.
adding something new to a law that we just passed, I think it makes sense to dive into that and make sure that we understand what we're doing.
Sure.
Which is why we discuss those things together.
Absolutely.
Okay, then, good, let's keep moving. So when we have this idea of a fee added to renting out these rooms, whether it's owner-occupied or non-owner-occupied, that fee should, I think, I mean, I don't understand why that fee wouldn't be paid. It's whether or not it's attached to having a license.
So there's two
Because you're
different...
still renting out the room in the home.
There's two different things I think that need to be taken into account here if we're looking back to 33, 34. One being the permit, the other being the license. Those two words are not interchangeable. They are two different things. The license, you need a business license because if you're a non-owner occupied short-term rental, you need the business license because you are operating a business. That's what we decided at that time. Now the permit is to have the, so that permit gets you a permit number, which you're going to need in the coming months to give to the short-term rental platforms in order to have your listing able to be listed. And that's what will allow us also to delist problematic short-term rentals, because we will let the platforms know permit number XYZ has been revoked or suspended. And then they're going to say, okay, we're going through our system and we're suspending or revoking that permit number. So just to be clear, there are kind of two different things that a lot of people conflated as one thing during those discussions. But if you really get into the nitty gritty with it, the permit is very different than the license.
Okay. And so they're all permitted, but in this ballot question that we're looking to put in front of the voters, instead of focusing on the permit, it was chosen to focus on the license as what would trigger with this amendment. The license is what triggers an occupancy fee, not having a permit.
I think we're really into the semantics here. I think we could have just as easily called this a permit fee or a license fee or an occupancy fee or a bed fee, or there could have been any number of things. The president's office chose to use the language here. I would be comfortable changing it to anything else if that
right, because I'm not, you know, the idea is that we have this fee charged for occupied room, noting that the intention of the bill is to charge a fee for something that is happening in our communities that is not adding towards the overall supply of rental housing, purchasable housing, and it is instead being used for a business purpose, correct?
Yes. One of the issues that many communities have faced when it comes to short-term rentals is housing is a zero-sum game. Every time that a house is occupied, that house is not available to be occupied. And so when we have people taking houses out of the market and they're not using them for, I guess I'll say, full-time housing for individuals, but rather converting them into business purposes where they may be used, even if they're used 20 days out of the month, that's still a place where someone cannot live then, where before that business was operational, that was a house that a family could live in.
Or a room that could have been rented in a house.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, because that's the problem, I think, with this amendment, is that instead of saying this is a fee for the occupancy of those rooms, it ties it to the license piece instead of just the occupancy of the space.
Well, I think the reasoning behind tying it to, in my estimation, the reasoning behind tying it to the license, again, gets back to the core of what we were trying to regulate in 33 and 34. I've always said, and we can, pull the footage and go for the instant replays. I've always said I have no interest in regulating what people do inside their own homes. If grandma wants to rent a room in the basement or whatever, and that's a way that she stretches retirement income, and she lives in that, and she just happens to say, okay, rather than having a long-term roommate, it makes more sense to me to do short-term rentals, fine. That's not the kind of behavior that I at least have sought to regulate in this entire discussion. My push has always been on the larger effect of more and more houses in the most desirable areas and starter houses throughout our city being turned into a business opportunity for an individual rather than a place for a family to live.
Mhm. So in that effect, that's why you see this fee being applied differently as well, even though I think by being permitted as Airbnbs, if I'm understanding the rules correctly that were posted somewhat recently about Airbnb, they would be paying the taxes that are applied to all Airbnbs just by being permitted. But we're making a distinction here between whether they pay a fee or not and what might be put in front of the voters.
Yes, and again, that's kind of almost a relic throwback to the spirit of 33 and 34.
Yeah, I care about the spirit, but I also care about like the words on the page and the implementation.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
all of this is, part of the huge overhaul that's being made. So I appreciate it. To that spirit, I understand the use of the license being chosen, but I'm not sure I agree that those fees shouldn't be paid. But I also understand that because if like the tax is being implemented in the same way, then why is the fee being implemented differently? Or why would we be asking the voters to implement a fee differently than I guess it's our prerogative here at the Board of Aldermen to choose or not choose whether
it's the discussion we're having. Yep.
Right, and that's what we're talking about, whether the amendment is to make it fit the letter of the law that was put in front of us in 33, that these people have to have licenses and these people will not have licenses. So charging them a license fee is possibly not the right choice of words. So license fee could be occupancy. Can you speak, so you're speaking right now to saying that instead of changing it to occupancy fee and having both categories included, you chose to remove one of the categories so they would not be paying that occupancy fee if we had changed it the other way.
After discussions with this committee last week, and then discussions with the president's office, we moved over to more of a flat fee type, which is what's in the committee substitute. There's a flat fee rather than the occupant per night, which was going to make the a flat fee based on the amount of bedrooms in the unit, rather than the amount of occupied rooms per night, both at the request of some of the operators as well as members of this committee to streamline that, to make it a little bit easier from committee members' perspectives, both on the operators as well as the mechanism for ultimately recouping those funds. And so this is just a further extension of that.
Okay. Perhaps other members of the committee have questions. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Does anyone have any additional questions? All right, Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share some of the same concerns and questions that my colleague from the First Ward just shared with the committee here and with the sponsor. I am curious, though. So this particular board bill is now requiring, if the amendment is approved and added to the language of the committee substitute, would require a non-owner occupied STR to pay a fee based off of occupied units per night.
No. This amendment, if adopted, would exclude the owner occupied from paying a fee.
Didn't I say non-owner occupied? So I'm sorry.
Sorry.
So the non-owner occupied would pay a fee per night per room.
There would be, yes, a fee per night per room on non-owner occupied listings of short-term rentals. Yeah.
Okay. So in order to do that, they're going to need a business license.
Yes.
And there's a fee for that business license.
Yes.
So they're paying $150 for the business license.
I would take your word on the specific.
They're paying $150 for the on the city's website. And that's only if they have under 2 employees. If they have more than 2 employees, which most, STR operators don't have any employees. They're usually either cleaning these things themselves or what have you. But let's just say $150 a year for a business license. So in addition to that, I really thought we were going to have a representative from the license collector's office here today. Alderman Browning, and it's in our meeting minutes from last week, indicated that he would like to speak to someone from the license collector's office. And I went back to the minutes to confirm that because I was kind of surprised to not see anyone from the license collector's office here today to talk about this, because one of the other things that comes along with getting a graduated business license, oftentimes, not always, maybe, I don't know, I need to ask that question of the license collector, but are these non-owner occupied units then also subject to property taxes? So the property tax, you're familiar with this?
I can tell you, I'm listening to your question, but I can tell you, Janika from the president's office, I know reached out to various members regarding their concerns, has met with the license collector 4 times regarding this, and she's a wealth of knowledge on the specifics there. So I would probably refer the question to her.
Sure. Thank you, Janika. So I would just, you and I briefly just had a discussion about this, that when you have a business license, oftentimes, and again, I don't know if it's always or if it's just dependent upon how our rules are written, but I know from many of the small business owners in my ward that their property is taxed, not the real estate, the property that's within the business taxed. And so if you, as an example, own a restaurant, and maybe members of the committee aren't aware of this, but it's something that I feel like we need to address for small in our city in general. But if you own a restaurant, you pay taxes not just on the real estate that you own, but you're also paying taxes on the equipment that's in that restaurant. So you pay taxes on the stove, you pay taxes on the refrigerator, you pay taxes on the tables and chairs. If you're a barber in the city of St. Louis, you pay a tax on your barber chair, a property tax on the barber chair. Now, where that money goes, I have no idea. I'll be perfectly clear and candid about that. I have no idea how much money the license collector's office, gives from the fees that they collect across the city on these small businesses. I think that that's, something that we have to have a deeper discussion on for sure. But it's one item of discussion that I don't think came up very much during, the previous session board bills with 3334, and here we are now talking about Board Bill 41, and I, for one, would love to have the license collector to talk about these issues and how this is going to impact these operators. I don't know if you have any insight that you're able to share that would illuminate those questions or concerns.
Yep. So I talked to the license collector, started this conversation back in November. As you all she still was having she still was trying to wrap her head around 33. So I had 3 more conversations with the license collector office, and once I think the administration started working with them on the implementation of 33, they were able to have more conversations relating to 41. Our very last conversation was in May, and when we met with the license collector, they gave me a form that they used to give to hotels when they didn't have the hotel motel tax. It was per night per room fee. They shared that form with us, so if we were to implement this, they said they have the infrastructure, and this is the form they would use for implementation. I guess that's what I'm looking for. We didn't talk specifically about the property tax question. No.
Right. And I think that that's a pretty big question for me. I'm curious to know the answer to it, because I think it's one thing to talk about wanting to, have a fee per room per night, but, what is the impact of, creating these fees, creating the licensing process? What's the process for evaluation? What's the process for implementation? What's the communication process that's going to happen in terms of, the operators getting these notices? I've also heard, varying stories as to how the money would be collected. I think last week, the sponsor mentioned that the operator would be responsible for paying the fee, and that they would have to go directly to the license collector's office to pay the fee. But then this week, I'm hearing that the various platforms would be able to accommodate that and pay the fee instead of the operator having to pay it, or it would be able to be passed along to the various guests or what have you. But then we also don't have any of the platforms here to discuss whether or not they're able to accommodate that. And I think that that would be helpful as well. I'm just curious, Alderman, I think you indicated last week, and I know I don't have the bill in front of me at the moment, but this was intended, or Janika, to go on the ballot for November, right?
Yes.
So when is the last date that we have available to pass this before we need to get it on the ballot? I think that would be sometime in August, if I'm not mistaken.
10 weeks before.
Yeah, I think it's the end of July. It would need to be done before we break down for the summer break. But just to make
We're also talking about adding additional meetings.
But just to make life easier for folks, because there's several people who have the similar questions for the license collector. I had thought that those questions had been addressed over the previous week. It's clear to me now that they have not. And so I'd like to just hold the bill, and we'll get the license collector or someone from the license collector's office and we can
could I
have
also
those questions answered, hopefully.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Alderman. And could I just also add to that request, maybe some representatives from the platforms to be able to...
The platforms have been oddly quiet on this, which, yeah.
I've been in conversation with Expedia. They said they've done something similar in several other municipalities. I've kept them engaged in the conversation. I can send an email today to see if they can maybe virtually Zoom in next week, if possible. But I have been in conversation with the platforms.
And to maybe also have clarification in terms of the point of payment, is that going to be the operator who has to come down to City Hall and make write out a check? Is it going to have to be done quarterly? Is it going to have to be done annually? Just what that process looks like, and are the platforms able to accommodate that? If it is something that the platforms are able to do, is it something that the license collector is able to work with the platforms to do? I think that those are just general questions that we would want to have answered before, taking a vote on the bill.
Sure.
But thank you. I appreciate that. Sure.
Madam Chair, is there, I guess I'm requesting that the bill be held for an additional week, and hopefully, I hope that we can add it to the next agenda, assuming that the license collector or someone from her office can be present to answer committee members' questions.
Thank you, Alderman Durant. Is there any more discussion before we remove the motion?
Just really quick, I think procedure-wise, since he's going to hold it, the alderman from the 9th would need to withdraw his motion. I withdraw my second.
Yeah, I'm happy to withdraw my motion.
And I withdraw my second.
Thank you, Alderman Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hayden. All right, is there any written testimony, Madam Clerk? Or before I do that, was there anyone here to speak on this today? Because we want to allow them to speak. Okay. All right. How you doing?
Hand me that.
Can you state your name for the record, and then I'll swear you in?
Hi, my name is Amanda McCracken.
Nice to meet you, Ms. McCracken. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
First of all, thank you for letting me take this chance to kind of give you guys some insight from the owner perspective. Oh, is it on? Okay.
It's on.
And I can answer some of these questions that you were just talking about, because I've been taxed. So just to start you off, these are just my properties. I have the equal amount of long-term rental and short-term rental. So I have 4 long-term. One of them is in Richmond Heights, just short of the city limits. And then the other 3 are in the city, mostly Dogtown. And then I have 4 short-term rentals. One of those short-term rentals is a 2-family, and that's the only property that I own as a partnership with 2 of my daughters. So it is owner occupied, but it's a 2-family, but we're still getting, our taxes have been doubled. I'm just gonna give you some numbers. In 2023, this is just my short-term rentals, not my long-term. The city was paid on behalf of occupancy tax from Airbnb, $34,237.25. That's just me, that's just mine. You multiply that by 1,000 owners like myself who are responsible, and we provide these beautiful homes for these people who come in town and spend loads of money, love our city, want to come back, meet their families from all over. That's $34 million to the city. So that's just on my short term. Property taxes in 2022 on my short-term rentals, I paid $6,254 in 2022. 2023, I paid $12,065.14 on the same homes. In 2022, I paid 0 personal property taxes on short-term rentals. 2023, I'm paying $150 per building that is used for short-term rental. Don't know what that's for. They just came up with a form I have to fill out. It's very confusing. It is like for hotels, which doesn't really apply to me, but I'm having to pay, without even warning, $150 per building. On top of that, I'm going to have to pay your annual inspection fee of $150. That's going to bring me up to another $600. That is just on my short term. My property taxes in 2022 on my short-term rentals was $6,254. In 2023, on my short-term rentals, it was $3,955. So my my taxes on my long terms went up by $285. The taxes on my short term went up $5,811. That's a huge difference. Same number of buildings. So we're getting taxed to death. And this thing with the per room, that's going to be impossible to monitor. You have 4 guests, you have 3 bedrooms. Are they going to use 2 bedrooms? Are they going to use 3 bedrooms? We don't know until they check out. We walk in like, yay, there's a room that wasn't used. We don't have to make that bed. That's when we know. So it's impossible to monitor ahead of time. I guess after the fact you could, but then how are you going to find out for sure? That owner going to just tell you? Let's see, let me get you some other numbers. So I just saw today on Zillow, the house across the street from me on Magnolia, 4922. It's a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2,300 square feet. They just listed it for rent, $3,000 a month. Now, if I have the house across the street, if I can get $3,000 a month for my property, I'm going to pull out of these short-term rentals and go back into long-term. St. Louis City is going to lose. My property taxes are going to be cut in half. You're going to lose that, thousands of dollars in occupancy taxes. You're also going to lose all the money that these people spend on the Schnucks that's around the corner, which promotes our community. The coffee shop right down the street on Columbia, they use that all the time. The local restaurants around Tower Grove Park, these people are going to be not here anymore. They're going to be somewhere else. I do have a lot of guests that come in for weddings, graduations, but I also have a lot of guests that come in for vacation. All those vacation people, they want to stay together. They're here, they want to stay as a family, they want a house, they want to cook their meals together, they want to play games, they want to have the backyard, they want to bring their dogs, and they want a house. If they're meeting on vacation in St. Louis, which they do, because it's true, we're right in the middle. We got Indianapolis, Kansas City, Texas, they all come up, they meet in St. Louis. They're going to pick Memphis, or they're going to pick Kansas City, well, I don't even know about Kansas City, but they're going to pick another city rather than our city. And when they come here, we have so much to offer. Our zoo is world-class, it's free. I just don't think that the city is understanding the benefit that we bring to the city with the amount of money that we're bringing in. And so we want to get rid of all those bad actors, which I think you've done an excellent job with 33 and 34. But why keep taxing us out of this business? Because that's what's happening. And it's hard. I mean, and running these things are hard. We spend a lot of time. I actually have 7 cleaners. They're not my employees because they work other jobs. Most of them are single moms. I pay every week. I pay $710 a week just in my cleaning fees to these ladies. And they depend on it because they're moms. They can go to their regular job, which is like a lot of them work in a dentist office. They go to the regular job, then they can clean for me, at their leisure, as long as it's before the guest checks in. So that's $710 a week. That's $36,920 a year that I'm pumping in to help these girls who help me to do these short-term rentals. My handyman, I bet they make between $10,000 and $50,000 a year, just depending on what needs to be done. I work in these yards. I keep I keep them beautiful. I water my flowers. I plant flowers. I am physically painting, cleaning. All of us responsible owners are doing these things. We are improving. And as far as availability, I'm a real estate broker. I've been one for 30 years. I happened to pull the numbers today. And just on Zillow, let me find that information. So there are 685 homes for sale in the city right now, active. 126 homes in the MLS for rent, 13 for auction. On Zillow, there are 1,178 homes just in the city available for rent. We're not hurting the rental market, we're not hurting, and as far as real estate sales and the pricing, that is due to a lack of inventory. It is nationwide. It has nothing to do with short-term rental owners driving the prices in the city. I also sell in the city. I just sold a house for $1 million in the city of St. Louis over by Forest Park. It was an off-market. Had that house gone on the market, it would have sold for 1.2. But it was a private sale because the owners are well-known and they didn't want to have people through and stuff like that. So, it's just the housing inventory that is causing these prices to go up. It's not us. We are actually taking these derelict homes and we are improving and making these homes beautiful again. Homes that people wouldn't normally, they're just vacant. Not only are we improving them, we're bringing people into the city. We're paying occupancy tax. We're paying property tax. We're paying inspection fees. We're paying so much money that's pumped in addition to what our guests are pumping into the economy. So I feel like we provide the city a really great service. And we do want to get rid of the bad guys, but that's not us. So we just pump a lot of stuff in. So, that's really kind of all I have to say, but the low inventory is not because of short-term rental. It's just like where we are nationwide.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. McCracken. You have officially become our expert witness on this today. That was a lot of great information.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because of that and because you offered,
Sure.
And we haven't had anyone from what would be kind of the other side of this this legislation and this prior to now, I would like, since you offered, to see if any of my colleagues had any questions that they would like to ask you.
Yes, ma'am, I'd be more than happy.
Okay.
I have a comment, but it's not for you.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Ms. McCracken. If you don't have to run out, I would like to speak to you
Absolutely.
very briefly afterwards. Okay.
Right,
Thank you. All right. Vice Chair Sonia.
I just hope that Alderman Orion watches this back because he left when public comment started. So I hope he will watch this back so that, I would love to talk to the sponsor about some of the points that were made.
All right, was there anyone online that wanted to speak, Madam Clerk?
No, but we did have 2 letters, and we had a total of 7 from, we had some from last week, and then we had 2 more in addition for, that were against the bill.
Okay, great. So that would be our acknowledge of any written testimony. Thank you for that. Does anyone have any announcements? All members.
Chair, I'm sorry, Chair Clark Hubbard. I just wanted to be clear that our last motion, we did withdraw the motion to adopt the Amendment 1 to Board Bill 41 Committee Sub.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so with that, all members were present. I'll accept the motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second,
It was
previous row.
motion by Vice Chair Sanye and seconded by Alderman from the 3rd with previous roll. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed day.